In African folklore, they say the weight of a grudge is like carrying a stone uphill forever. The longer you hold on, the heavier it feels, and yet you can't seem to let go. I learned that lesson the hard way. The person who hurt me wasn't just anyone, they were someone I trusted, someone I thought would never betray me. And when it happened, the pain was like nothing I had ever felt before. But what came next was even harder to face. Could I ever forgive them? And more importantly, could I forgive myself for holding on to the anger for so long? This wasn't just a stranger. It was someone I called family, a person whose voice carried the weight of wisdom and whose presence shaped my understanding of trust and love. Their name was Uncle Adisa, which means one who speaks clearly in Yoruba. To me, he was more than an uncle. He was a mentor, a guide, and the one who always seemed to have the answers to life's most difficult questions. Growing up, Uncle Adisa would tell me stories under the shade of the baobab tree. His tales weren't just entertainment, they were lessons steeped in the morals and values of our ancestors. He taught me about kindness, the strength of community, and the importance of integrity. He was the kind of person whose words you believed without question, whose actions you followed without hesitation. And that made what happened all the more devastating. One day, everything I believed about him shattered. A betrayal so deep, it felt like the ground beneath me gave way. His actions weren't just a blow to my trust, they were a wound to the foundation of everything he had taught me. In that moment, the person I admired most became the source of my greatest pain. In African traditions, forgiveness is more than an act of the individual. It is a call to restore harmony within the family, the community, and the soul. To forgive is to choose peace over chaos, unity over division. But how could I reconcile these teachings with the reality of my anger and hurt? How could I bring myself to forgive the one person who had shaped my world, only to tear it apart? This is the story of how I found myself standing at the crossroads of anger and healing, weighed down by the pain of betrayal, but desperate to find a way forward. It was a sunny afternoon, the kind of day that starts with quiet optimism. I was at the marketplace, laughing with neighbors and carrying baskets of freshly picked yams. Life felt simple and good. And then, I overheard something that stopped me in my tracks. Adisa sold the land, someone said. At first, I thought they were mistaken. The land. Our land. The ancestral land that had belonged to our family for generations. Surely, they couldn't mean that. But when I confronted Uncle Adisa later that day, he confirmed it. I had no choice, he said, his voice calm, as though his words weren't tearing my heart apart. We needed the money. He had sold our family's most cherished inheritance, the land where our ancestors were buried, where we gathered every harvest season to honor their spirits and celebrate our connection to one another. I felt the ground shift beneath me. The betrayal wasn't just about money or property, it was about trust, tradition, and the sacred bond of family. That land wasn't just soil, it was our history, our identity. And he had given it away without even telling me, without asking the family. It was a decision he made on his own, a decision that broke something deep inside me. The words he spoke next stung even more. You'll understand one day, he said, as though my pain was nothing but immaturity. As though selling our heritage was something I should simply accept. But how could I? The person who had taught me to honor our ancestors, to cherish the stories and traditions they left behind, had been the one to tear it all apart. I couldn't stop replaying his words in my head. We needed the money. What money? For what? There were no answers, only silence. And that silence screamed louder than any explanation could have. I felt betrayed not just by his actions, but by the lack of remorse, the way he acted as if it didn't matter. The days that followed were filled with anger and confusion. I avoided the marketplace, knowing that everyone was whispering about the betrayal. I avoided Uncle Adisa, unable to look him in the eye without feeling the weight of what he had done. The man I had once admired, who had been my rock, now felt like a stranger. Betrayal from family cuts differently. It's not just about the act, it's about the trust that shatters, the memories that feel tainted. I couldn't help but question everything he had ever told me. Was it all a lie? Did he ever truly care about the values he preached? In African traditions, land is more than just property, it's a connection to our ancestors, a symbol of unity and survival. To sell it without the family's consent was not just a betrayal of trust, it was a betrayal of our heritage. And in the middle of this pain, I kept asking myself one question: how do you even begin to think about forgiveness when the wound is this deep? The truth is, I didn't have an answer. At that moment, forgiveness felt impossible. The anger felt too heavy, the pain too raw. And yet, deep down, I knew that holding on to this resentment was like drinking poison and expecting him to suffer. But how could I forgive him when every time I thought of what he had done, the wound reopened? For weeks after Uncle Adisa sold the land, I carried my anger like a weight strapped to my back. Everywhere I went, it followed me, heavy, unforgiving, and suffocating. I avoided the market. I avoided family gatherings. I avoided him. Every time I saw his face, I felt the sting of betrayal all over again. Then, one evening, I found myself sitting under the baobab tree, the same place where Uncle Adisa used to tell his stories. It was quiet, except for the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant hum of crickets. That's when I remembered something an old griot once said: when you hold on to anger, you burn the bridge you may need tomorrow. Those words stayed with me, haunting me. What bridge was I burning by holding on to this pain? And what if, one day, I needed to cross it? At first, I resisted. The idea of forgiveness felt like betrayal to myself. Why should I forgive someone who didn't even say sorry? I asked myself over and over again. Uncle Adisa hadn't apologized, hadn't acknowledged the depth of what he had done. Forgiveness felt like letting him off the hook, like saying what he did was okay. And it wasn't. But the griot's words lingered, challenging me in ways I didn't expect. I started to realize that my anger wasn't punishing him, it was punishing me. It consumed my thoughts, my energy, my peace. I was no longer carrying the betrayal, it was carrying me, dragging me down with every step. One night, I visited the elder of our family, Mama Kemi, hoping for clarity. She was sitting on her veranda, weaving a basket, her hands moving with practiced precision. When I told her what I was feeling, she listened silently, her eyes soft but knowing. When I finished, she said, "There is a story my mother used to tell me. It's about the river and the stone." She began, her voice steady and soothing. Once, there was a river that flowed freely, bringing life to everything it touched. But one day, a large stone fell into the middle of the river. The stone blocked its path, causing the water to swell with anger and frustration. The river tried to push the stone, to move it, but it was too heavy. The harder the river pushed, the more stuck the stone became. Eventually, the river stopped fighting. It realized that it couldn't move the stone, but it could move around it. And so, it carved a new path, flowing freely once again. Over time, the stone grew smaller, worn down by the river's gentle persistence, until it disappeared entirely. Mama Kemi looked at me and said, "You are like the river. The anger you feel is the stone. You can keep pushing against it, letting it block your path, or you can find a way to flow around it." Her words struck something deep inside me. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting what Uncle Adisa had done. It didn't mean excusing it or pretending it hadn't hurt. It meant finding a way to move around the pain, to reclaim my peace without waiting for him to make it right. The first step was the hardest. I sat alone under the baobab tree that night and said his name out loud. "Adisa," I whispered, as though speaking to the wind. "I forgive you." The words felt foreign, almost impossible. But as I said them again, they felt lighter, like a stone I had been carrying had been lifted from my chest. Forgiveness wasn't instant. It was a process, a choice I had to make every day. Some days, the anger tried to creep back in, whispering that I was weak for letting go. But I reminded myself of Mama Kemi's story. I wasn't weak, I was like the river, carving a new path, finding my way back to myself. Forgiveness isn't something that happens in a single moment. It's a journey, a winding road full of stops and starts, doubts and revelations. For me, it began with words I couldn't speak aloud. Late one night, I sat at my table with a piece of paper and wrote to Uncle Adisa. I wrote everything I had been carrying, the hurt, the anger, the questions that had no answers. "Why didn't you tell us?" I wrote. "Why didn't you trust us enough to share the burden instead of making that decision alone?" The words poured out like a flood. I wrote about the betrayal, the sleepless nights, and how his actions had torn a hole in the fabric of our family. But I also wrote about the griot's words and Mama Kemi's story of the river and the stone. I wrote about my desire to let go, not for his sake, but for mine. When I finished, I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. I never sent it. That letter wasn't for him, it was for me. It was the first step in unburdening my soul, in releasing the weight of the emotions I had been carrying for so long. Still, the road wasn't easy. Some days felt like progress, like the sun breaking through after a storm. Other days, the anger came rushing back, and I found myself questioning whether forgiveness was even possible. It felt like taking one step forward and two steps back, like trying to climb a hill where the ground kept slipping away beneath my feet. But each time the anger resurfaced, I reminded myself of the griot's wisdom: when you hold on to anger, you burn the bridge you may need tomorrow. I thought about the bridge I wanted to rebuild, not just with Uncle Adisa, but with myself, with my sense of peace and balance. In our community, forgiveness is not an individual act, it's a collective one. It's about restoring harmony within the family, healing the ties that bind us to one another. One evening, I joined a gathering at the village square. It was a traditional event where grievances could be aired and resolved with the guidance of elders. It wasn't easy to stand there and speak about what had happened, but the elders listened patiently, offering their wisdom. They reminded me that forgiveness was about moving forward, not erasing the past, and that healing begins when we choose to let go of the pain. Their words stayed with me. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or pretending the hurt didn't exist. It was about acknowledging the pain and choosing not to let it control me anymore. Eventually, I knew I had to speak to Uncle Adisa. Not to reconcile, but to let go. I found him sitting under the baobab tree, where so many of our conversations had taken place. My heart pounded as I approached him. For a moment, I thought about turning back, about keeping my pain to myself. But then I remembered the river and the stone. This was my chance to flow around the obstacle, to find a new path. Adisa, I said, my voice trembling. I need to say this, not for you, but for me. I forgive you. He looked at me, startled, and for a moment, there was silence. Then he nodded, his eyes heavy with emotions I couldn't quite read. I didn't wait for an apology or an explanation. I didn't need them anymore. Saying the words aloud was enough. It was like releasing a bird I had been holding in my hands for too long. Forgiveness didn't change what had happened. It didn't erase the pain or restore the land. But it freed me from the chains of anger and resentment. It allowed me to reclaim my peace, to focus on what truly mattered, the bonds that remained, the lessons I had learned, and the strength I had found within myself. Forgiving Uncle Adisa didn't erase the scars. The pain of losing our ancestral land didn't magically disappear, and the question I had once suddenly answered. But forgiveness did something even more profound. It made the scars a part of a story I could live with. It transformed the pain into a chapter of growth, not a lifetime of resentment. Through forgiveness, I found the freedom to rebuild my peace. No longer was I carrying the heavy stone of anger, letting it weigh me down with every step. I was free to focus on what I still had, my family, my community, and the wisdom of our traditions. The act of letting go didn't change the past, but it changed me. It reminded me of my strength and the resilience that comes from choosing peace over pain. In many African cultures, forgiveness is not seen as a weakness. It is an act of courage, a strength that binds us to our humanity. It's a reminder that we are all connected, that the well-being of one affects the well-being of all. Forgiveness restores harmony, not just within ourselves, but within the community. I think of the griot's words often: when you hold on to anger, you burn the bridge you may need tomorrow. Forgiveness, for me, was about rebuilding that bridge, not to forget what had happened, but to ensure that I could move forward without the weight of the past holding me back. Mama Kemi once told me another story, one that has stayed with me. She said, "A lion with a thorn in its paw cannot hunt. It cannot run, it cannot rest, and it cannot roar. Only when the thorn is removed can the lion return to its strength." My anger was the thorn, and forgiveness was the act of removing it. With the thorn gone, I could find my voice again, my purpose, my peace. Forgiveness doesn't make you forget the lesson, it helps you carry it with clarity and wisdom. It doesn't erase the hurt, it transforms it into something that no longer defines you. Forgiveness gave me back control, not over what happened, but over how I chose to move forward. As you listen to this story, I want you to ask yourself, who carries the stone in your life? Is it someone who hurt you deeply, someone whose actions left you carrying a weight you never asked for? What would happen if you chose to let that stone go? How much lighter would your soul feel? Forgiveness doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't mean forgetting. But it does mean freeing yourself from the chains of anger and resentment. Take the first step today, whether it's writing down your feelings, saying a quiet prayer, or simply deciding that you're ready to release the weight. This isn't just about the person who hurt you, it's about you. It's about your peace, your growth, your freedom. Imagine a world where forgiveness is not a burden, but a bridge connecting us, healing us, and helping us move forward together. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Let's spark a conversation about healing and humanity. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories that connect us to our culture, our values, and our shared humanity.